And to be fair, you've not only been patiently waiting today, but some of you have been semi-patiently waiting for many weeks, as we have had a break in the live streams with me moving house and everything. So, I hope we're ready. Chapter 15. The Mouse Burglar. My grandmother hustled me back into my own bedroom and out onto the balcony. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I'm going to put you in the sock now." "I hope I can manage this," I said. "I'm only a little mouse." "You'll manage," she said. "Good luck, my darling." She popped me into the sock and started lowering me over the balcony. I crouched inside the sock and held my breath. Through the stitches I could see out quite clearly. Miles below me, the children playing on the beach were the size of beetles. The sock started swinging in the breeze. I looked up and saw my grandmother's head sticking out over the railings of the balcony above. "You're nearly there," she called out. "Here we go. Gently does it. You're down." I felt a slight bump. "In you go," my grandmother was shouting. "Hurry, hurry, hurry! Search the room!" I jumped out of the sock and ran into the Grand High Witch's bedroom. There was the same musty smell about the place that I had noticed in the ballroom. It was the stench of witches. It reminded me of the smell inside the men's public lavatory at our local railway station. As far as I could see, the room was tidy enough. There was no sign anywhere that it was inhabited by anyone but an ordinary person. But then there wouldn't be, would there? No witch would be stupid enough to leave anything suspicious lying around for the hotel maid to see. Suddenly I saw a frog jumping across the carpet and disappearing under the bed. I jumped myself. "Hurry up!" came my grandmother's voice from somewhere high up outside. "Grab the stuff and get out!" I started skittering round and trying to search the room. This wasn't so easy. I couldn't, for example, open any of the drawers. I couldn't open the doors of the big wardrobe either. I stopped skittering about. I sat in the middle of the floor and had a think. If the Grand High Witch wanted to hide something top secret, where would she put it? Certainly not in any of the ordinary drawers. Not in the wardrobe either. It was too obvious. I jumped up onto the bed to get a better view of the room. Hey, I thought, what about under the mattress? Very carefully, I lowered myself over the edge of the bed and wormed my way underneath the mattress. I had to push forward hard to make any headway, but I kept at it. I couldn't see a thing. I was scrambling about under the mattress when my head suddenly bumped against something hard inside the mattress above me. I reached up and felt it with my paw. Could it be a little bottle? It was a little bottle. I could trace the shape of it through the cloth of the mattress. And right alongside it, I felt another hard lump, and another, and another. The Grand High Witch must have slit open the mattress and put all the bottles inside and then sewn it all up again. I began tearing away frantically at the mattress cloth above my head with my teeth. My front teeth were extremely sharp, and it didn't take me long to make a small hole. I climbed into the hole and grabbed a bottle by the neck. I pushed it down through the hole in the mattress and climbed out after it. Walking backwards and dragging the bottle behind me, I managed to reach the edge of the mattress. I rolled the bottle off the bed onto the carpet. It bounced, but it didn't break. I jumped down off the bed. I examined the little bottle. It was identical to the one the Grand High Witch had had in the ballroom. There was a label on this one. Formula 86, it said. Delayed Action Mouse Maker. Then it said, this bottle contains 500 doses. Eureka! I felt tremendously pleased with myself. 3 frogs came hopping out from under the bed. They crouched on the carpet, staring at me with large black eyes. I stared back at them. Those huge eyes were the saddest things I'd ever seen. It suddenly occurred to me that almost certainly once upon a time they had been children, those frogs, before the Grand High Witch had got hold of them. I stood there clutching the bottle and staring at the frogs. "Who are you?" I asked them. At that exact moment, I heard a key turning in the lock of the door, and the door burst open, and the Grand High Witch swept into the room. The frogs jumped underneath the bed again in one quick hop. I darted after them, still clutching the bottle, and I ran back against the wall and squeezed in behind one of the bedposts. I heard feet walking on the carpet. I peeped round the bedpost. The 3 frogs were clustered together under the middle of the bed. Frogs cannot hide like mice. They cannot run like mice either. All they can do, poor things, is to hop about rather clumsily. Suddenly, the Grand High Witch's face came into view, peering under the bed. I popped my head back behind the bedpost. "So there you are, my little froggies," I heard her saying. "You can stay where you are until I go to bed tonight. Then I shall throw you out of the window, and the seagulls can have you for supper." Suddenly, very loud and clear, there came the sound of my grandmother's voice through the open balcony door. "Hurry up, my darling," it shouted. "Do hurry up. You'd better come out quickly." "Who is calling?" snapped the Grand High Witch. I peeped round the bedpost again and saw her walking across the carpet to the balcony door. "Who is this on my balcony?" she muttered. "Who is it? Who dares to trespass on my balcony?" She went through the door onto the balcony itself. "What is this knitting wool hanging down here?" I heard her saying. "Oh, hello," came my grandmother's voice. "I just dropped my knitting over the balcony by mistake, but it's all right. I've got hold of one end of it. I can pull it up by myself. Thank you all the same." I marvelled at the coolness of her voice. "Who were you talking to just now?" snapped the Grand High Witch. "Who were you telling to hurry up and come out quickly?" "I was talking to my little grandson," I heard my grandmother saying. "He's been in the bathroom for hours, and it's time he came out. He sits in there reading books and he forgets completely where he is. Do you have any children, my dear?
I do not,
shouted the Grand High Witch, and she came back quickly into the bedroom, slamming the balcony door behind her. I was cooked. My escape route was closed. I was shut up in the room with the Grand High Witch and 3 terrified frogs. I was just as terrified as the frogs. I was quite sure that if I was spotted, I would be caught and thrown out over the balcony for the seagulls. There came a knock on the bedroom door.
What is it this time?
Shouted the Grand High Witch.
It is we, ancient ones,
said a meek voice from behind the door.
It is 6 o'clock and we have come to collect the bottles that you promised us. Oh, high grandness.
I saw her crossing the carpet towards the door. The door was opened, and then I saw a whole lot of feet and shoes beginning to enter the room. They were coming in slowly and hesitantly, as though the owners of those shoes were frightened of entering.
Come in,
snapped the Grand High Witch.
Do not stand out there dithering in the corridor. I don't have all night.
I saw my chance. I jumped out from behind the bedpost and ran like lightning towards the open door. I jumped over several pairs of shoes on the way, and in 3 seconds, I was out in the corridor, still clutching the precious bottle to my chest. No one had seen me. There were no shouts of "Mouse, mouse!" All I could hear were the voices of the ancient witches burbling their silly sentences about
how kind your grandness is,
and all the rest of it. I went scampering down the corridor to the stairs and up one flight. I went to the 5th floor and then along the corridor again until I came to the door of my own bedroom. Thank goodness there was no one in sight. Using the bottom of the little bottle, I began tapping on the door. Tap, 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 tap. I went. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Would my grandmother hear me? I thought she must. The bottle made quite a loud tap each time it struck. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Just so long as nobody came along the corridor. But the door didn't open. I decided to take a risk. "Grandmama!" I shouted as loudly as I possibly could. "Grandmama! It's me! Let me in!" I heard her feet come across the carpet and the door opened. I went in like an arrow. "I've done it!" I cried, jumping up and down. "I've got it, Grandmama! Look, here it is! I've got a whole bottle of it!" She closed the door. She bent down and picked me up and hugged me. "Oh, my darling," she cried. "Thank heavens you're safe." She took the little bottle from me and read the label aloud. "Formula 86 Delayed Action Mouse Maker," she read. "This bottle contains 500 doses. You brilliant darling boy. You're a wonder. You're a marvel. How on earth did you get out of her room?" "I nipped out when the ancient witches were coming in," I told her. "It was all a bit hairy, Grandmama. I wouldn't want to do it again." "I saw her too," my grandmother said. "I know you did, Grandmama. I heard you talking to each other. Didn't you think she was absolutely foul? She's a murderer, my grandmother said. She's the most evil woman in the entire world. Did you see her mask? I asked. It's amazing, my grandmother said. It looks just like a real face. Even though I knew it was a mask, I still couldn't tell. Oh, my darling, she cried, giving me a hug. I thought I'd never see you again. I'm so happy you got away. Chapter 16. Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins meet Bruno. My grandmother carried me back into her own bedroom and put me on the table. She set the precious bottle down beside me. "What time are those witches having supper in the dining room?" she asked. 8 o'clock, I said. She looked at her watch. "It is now 6:10, she said. "We've got until 8 o'clock to work out our next move." Suddenly, her eye fell upon Bruno. He was still in the banana bowl on the table. He'd eaten 3 bananas and was now attacking a 4th. He had become immensely fat. "That's quite enough," my grandmother said, lifting him out of the bowl and putting him on the tabletop. "I think it's time we returned this little fellow to the bosom of his family. Don't you agree, Bruno?" Bruno scowled at her. I'd never seen a mouse scowl before, but he managed it.
"My parents let me eat as much as I want,"
he said.
"I'd rather be with them than with you."
"Of course you would," my grandmother said. "Do you know where your parents might be at this moment?"
"They were in the lounge not long ago."
"Oh. They were in the lounge not long ago," I said. "I saw them sitting there as we dashed through on our way up here." "Right," my grandmother said. "Let's go and see if they're still there. Do you want to come along?" she added, looking at me. "Yes, please," I said. "I shall put you both in my handbag," she said. "Keep quiet and stay out of sight. If you must peep out now and again, don't show more than your nose." Her handbag was a large, bulgy, black leather affair with a tortoise-shell clasp. She picked up Bruno and me and popped us into it. "I shall leave the clasp undone," she said. "But be sure to keep out of sight." I had no intention of keeping out of sight. I wanted to see everything. I seated myself in a little side pocket inside the bag, near the clasp, and from there I was able to poke my head out whenever I wanted to.
"Hey!"
Bruno called out.
"Give me the rest of that banana I was eating."
"Oh, all right," my grandmother said. "Anything to keep you quiet." She dropped the half-eaten banana into the bag, then slung the bag over her arm and marched out of the room and went thumping along the corridor with her walking stick. We went down in a lift to the ground floor and made our way through the reading room to the lounge. And there, sure enough, sat Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins in a couple of armchairs with a low, round, glass-covered table between them. There were several other groups in there as well, but the Jenkinses were the only couple sitting alone. Mr. Jenkins was reading a newspaper. Mrs. Jenkins was knitting something large and mustard-coloured. Only my nose and eyes were above the clasp of my grandmother's handbag, but I had a super view. I could see everything. My grandmother, dressed in black lace, went thumping across the floor of the lounge and halted in front of the Jenkinses' table. "Are you Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins?" she asked. Mr. Jenkins looked at her over the top of his newspaper and frowned. "Yes," he said. "I am Mr. Jenkins. What can I do for you, madam?" "I'm afraid I have some rather alarming news for you," she said. "It's about your son, Bruno." "What about Bruno?" Mr. Jenkins said. Mrs. Jenkins looked up, but went on knitting. "What's the little blighter been up to now?" Mr. Jenkins asked. "Raiding the kitchen, I suppose?" "It's a bit worse than that," my grandmother said. Do you think we might go somewhere more private while I tell you about it?" "Private?" Mr. Jenkins said. "Why do we have to be private?" "This is not an easy thing for me to explain," my grandmother said. "I'd much rather we all went up to your room and sat down before I tell you any more." Mr. Jenkins lowered his paper. Mrs. Jenkins stopped knitting. "I don't want to go up to my room, madam," Mr. Jenkins said. "I'm quite comfortable here, thank you very much." He was a large, coarse man, and he wasn't used to being pushed around by anybody. "Kindly state your business and then leave us alone," he added. He spoke as though he was addressing someone who was trying to sell him a vacuum cleaner at the back door. My poor grandmother, who had been doing her best to be as kind to them as possible, now began to bristle a bit herself. "We really can't talk in here," she said. "There are too many people. This is a rather delicate and personal matter." "I'll talk where I dashed well want to, madam," Mr. Jenkins said. "Come on now, out with it. If Bruno has broken a window or smashed your spectacles, then I'll pay for the damage, but I'm not budging out of this seat." One or two other groups in the room were beginning to stare at us now. "Where is Bruno, anyway?" Mr. Jenkins said. "Tell him to come here and see me." "He's here already," my grandmother said. "He's in my handbag." She patted the big floppy leather bag with her walking stick. "What the heck do you mean he's in your handbag?" Mr. Jenkins shouted.
"Are you trying to be funny?"
Mrs. Jenkins said, very prim. "There's nothing funny about this," my grandmother said. "Your son has suffered a rather unfortunate mishap." "He's always suffering mishaps," Mr. Jenkins said. "He suffers from overeating and then he suffers from wind. You should hear him after supper. He sounds like a brass band. But a good dose of castor oil soon puts him right again. Where is the little beggar?"
"I've already told you," my grandmother said. "He's in my handbag. But I do think it might be better if we went somewhere private before you meet him in his present state." "This woman's mad," Mrs. Jenkins said. "Tell her to go away." "The plain fact is," my grandmother said, "that your son Bruno has been rather drastically altered."
"Altered?" shouted Mr. Jenkins. "What the devil do you mean, altered?"
"Go away,"
Mrs. Jenkins said.
You're a silly old woman.
I'm trying to tell you as gently as I possibly can that Bruno really is in my handbag, my grandmother said. My own grandson actually saw them doing it to him.
Saw who? Doing what to him, for heaven's sake? Shouted Mr. Jenkins.
He had a black moustache which jumped up and down when he shouted.
Saw the witches turning him into a mouse,
my grandmother said.
Call the manager, dear,
Mrs. Jenkins said to her husband.
Have this madwoman thrown out of the hotel.
At this point, my grandmother's patience came to an end. She fished around in her handbag and found Bruno. She lifted him out and dumped him on the glass-topped table. Mrs. Jenkins took one look at the fat little brown mouse who was still chewing a bit of banana, and she let out a shriek that rattled the crystals on the chandelier. She sprang out of her chair, yelling,
It's a mouse! Take it away! I can't stand the things!
It's Bruno, my grandmother said.
You nasty cheeky old woman! Shouted Mr. Jenkins.
He started flapping his newspaper at Bruno, trying to sweep him off the table. My grandmother rushed forward and managed to grab hold of him before he was swept away. Mrs. Jenkins was still screaming her head off, and Mr. Jenkins was towering over us and shouting,
Get out of here! How dare you frown my life like that? Take your filthy mouse away this instant!
Help! Screamed Mrs. Jenkins. Her face had gone the colour of the underside of a fish. Well, I did my best, my grandmother said, and with that she turned and sailed out of the room, carrying Bruno with her. Chapter 17. The Plan. When we got back to the bedroom, my grandmother took both me and Bruno out of her handbag and put us on the table.
Why on earth didn't you speak up and tell your father who you were?
She said to Bruno.
Because I had my mouth full,
Bruno said. He jumped straight back into the bowl of bananas and went on with his eating. What a very disagreeable little boy you are, my grandmother said to him. Not boy, I said. Mouse. Quite right, my darling. But we don't have time to worry about him at this moment. We have plans to make. In about an hour and a half's time, all the witches will be going down to supper in the dining room, right? Right, I said. And every one of them has got to be given a dose of mouse maker, she said. How on earth are we going to do that? Grandmama, I said. I think you are forgetting that a mouse can go places where human beings can't. That's quite right, she said. But even a mouse can't go creeping around on the tabletop carrying a bottle and sprinkling mouse maker all over the witch's roast beef without being spotted. I wasn't thinking of doing it in the dining room, I said. Then where? She asked. In the kitchen, I said, while their food is being got ready. My grandmother stared at me. My darling child, she said slowly, I do believe that turning you into a mouse has doubled your brain power. A little mouse, I said, can go scuttling round the kitchen among the pots and pans, and if he's very careful, no one will ever see him. Brilliant! My grandmother cried out. By
golly, I think you've got it. The only thing is, I said, how will I know which food is theirs? I don't want to put it in the wrong saucepan. It would be disastrous if I turned all the other guests into mice by mistake, and especially you, Grandmamma. Then you'll just have to creep into the kitchen and find a good hiding place and wait and listen. Just lie there in some dark cranny listening to what the cooks are saying, and then, with a bit of luck, somebody's going to give you a clue. Whenever they have a very big party to cook for, the food is always prepared separately. Right, I said. That's what I'll have to do. I shall wait there and I shall listen and I shall hope for a bit of luck. It's going to be very dangerous, my grandmother said. Nobody welcomes a mouse in the kitchen. If they see you, they'll squash you to death. I won't let them see me, I said. Don't forget you'll be carrying the bottle, she said, so you won't be nearly so quick and nippy. I can run quite fast standing up with the bottle in my arms, I said. I did it just now, don't you remember? I came all the way up from the Grand High Witch's room carrying it. What about unscrewing the top? She said. That might be difficult for you. Let me try, I said. I took hold of the little bottle and using both my front paws, I found I was able to unscrew the cap quite easily. That's great, my grandmother said. You really are a very clever mouse. She glanced at her watch. At 7:30, she said, I shall go down to the dining room for supper with you in my handbag. I shall then release you under the table together with the precious bottle, and from then on, you'll be on your own. You'll have to work your way unseen across the dining room to the door that leads into the kitchen. There will be waiters going in and out of that door all the time. You will have to choose the right moment and nip in behind one of them, but for heaven's sake be sure that you don't get trodden on or squeezed in the door. I'll try not to, I said. And whatever happens, you mustn't let them catch you. Don't go on about it, Grandmamma. You're making me nervous. You're a brave little fellow, she said. I do love you. What shall we do with Bruno? I asked her. Bruno looked up. I'm coming with you, he said, speaking with his mouth full of banana. I'm not going to miss my supper. My grandmother considered this for a moment. I'll take you along, she said, if you promise to stay in my bag and keep absolutely silent. Will you pass food down to me from the table? Bruno asked. Yes, she said, if you promise to behave yourself. Would you like something to eat, my darling? She said to me. No, thank you, I said. I'm too excited to eat. And I've got to keep fit and frisky for the big job ahead. It's a big job, all right, my grandmother said. You'll never do a bigger one. That was the end of chapter 17. And I'm going to continue, Fox fans. I am going to continue. Because it took me a little while to get warmed up with The Witches today, with me not reading it for a few weeks. I'd got into a good flow last time, so it didn't take me too long each stream to get into the reading. But I felt a little bit sluggish in that first chapter, The Mouse Burglar, and it went okay. It went okay, but chapter 2 and chapter 3 of today's stream was much smoother, so I'm going to continue.
going to continue. Yeah, I'm gonna try and go all the way to the end today. This was my original plan, but I didn't want to promise 7 chapters if I felt like I couldn't handle 7 chapters, or if it just didn't work. You know, as I don't live by myself, you've got to respect these things. But that was my original plan. Like, I was actually gonna call this stream a witches marathon, and say that I was going to have all 7 chapters today and finish it up. But with me not streaming for a little while, it takes some getting back into it. There's not just all the setup and stuff, but you know, you've got to get back into the flow and everything. Live reading is very different to the regular recorded reading, of course, especially with video and everything. So take some time to get going, and that was like partly why I was just really enjoying the chat as well. So thanks for your patience with that. But it's like, it's nice just to get comfortable. But I was still rusty with that first chapter. I had read through it, but or nearly all of it, but it's so different just reading it to yourself in comfort and actually reading it live. So, you know, that's how it is. I guess I could have done a full dress rehearsal, but I don't know, it's not really my style. But short break, like I said, I didn't want to promise anything. That's why I wanted to warm up with a bit of The Hobbit, which is a very popular one as well anyway. But I will go for gold. And Jake Thomas has popped in mid witches drama. Yeah, you've got to get into the witches, Jake, if you're still around. It's the only way. One day I might try and challenge myself to do a really calm reading of a Roald Dahl book, because like even with Fantastic Mr. Fox, I tried to keep it peaceful. But they're just so fun. You know, the drama will always come through. I don't think I could ever read a Roald Dahl book just in a completely like neutral way. It would be incredibly difficult for me. One thing I do need to do, apart from change the text, is to give you the picture time, because I intentionally skip the pictures just to give the flow to the reading, apart from just a little glimpse of Bruno and things. And then we had the boy squeezing under the mattress and retrieving the Formula 86 alongside those petrified little frogs. Bless them. Bless them. And then the seemingly beautiful and so innocent lady, although a little bit disturbing, but the mask of the Grand High Witch peering under the bed, and those frogs. I mean, they're not even making an effort to hide, are they, to be honest? And the boy as the mouse squeezing behind that bedpost. Yeah, Quentin Blake doing these illustrations. So iconic. So iconic. There are some other versions as well, but Quentin Blake is, I think, the most iconic. Ah, right. Ah, so I wasn't a million miles off with that, Lynette. Yeah, I've not heard of it. But he does do some lighter things, doesn't he? And he shows his humour, even in Lord of the Rings, but particularly in The Hobbit. But here are the ancient ones that come in with their meek voices, and the Grand High Witch has no patience for them whatsoever. the petrified frogs, we don't know. He asks, "Who are you?" just as the Grand High Witch returns, so we don't get any answer from them. If they can speak, we don't know. He presumes they're children that have been turned into frogs, but we don't know it. We have no idea. It could be some enemy or who knows. And she said that she was going to throw them out of the window and feed them to the seagulls for their supper. And then here's Bruno getting increasingly fat, engorging himself. Oh, thanks very much, Proxy. That's really nice of you to say. Yeah, The Secret Garden is an absolute joy. And that was very casually read by myself, like particularly in the first instance. And the editing was very, very, very light. That's why I called it raw reading, because I was just reading out of the book, and I wasn't practicing anything before I came to it. So I was really, to be fair, I was reading most of that for the first time as I was reading it. Like I said as well, like editing was very, very light, particularly in the first instance. But as it went on, and I was reading it over a very long time span, and I used to release them as individual chapters with chat in between the chapters, before the chapter and afterwards, as like almost like a little podcast episode. I think it was 16 episodes that I called Raw Reading. But as it went on, I did add a little bit more polish. I'd improved my microphone, and I just couldn't help improving the editing as well. Like, as I was improving my skills from working on Harry Potter and a couple of audible things, and Lord of the Rings and other stories and things, you know. So the later chapters are more polished than the earlier chapters. But it's been amazingly popular, The Secret Garden. It so surprised me. It was such a quiet release that when I first started those episodes, they technically launched the Red Fox Voice channel, that second channel that I had, and it just came out very quietly. Nearly everybody at the time was very focused on Harry Potter, and my live streaming as that came along as well was popular. Yeah, and a couple of other series were definitely more popular than The Secret Garden. But once I got it finished and that complete audiobook went out, and I added the music and things, it's been a real success. So that's absolutely lovely, because it's such a charming book. I know it's very outdated, and therefore I think almost inherently will be controversial in places. It was written over 100 years ago, and is touching on dangerous themes with colonialization of India and such. But in my opinion, a really beautiful book. And today, actually, a little heads up, I've been looking at A Little Princess. It's been mentioned many times, and I really, really, really have wanted to record something for fans of The Secret Garden. So we've got Dracula on the go, and I'm absolutely returning to that, like I've said. And we've had Animal Farm, and I must admit, like, I expected Animal Farm to excite more people than it did. I mean, it's such a famous story, and I put it together as a little surprise and released the full audiobook, which I don't normally do. You know, I normally do a chapter at a time, and I tease and share samples and everything, and I just recorded the entire thing and put it out as a finished piece. And there's quite a lot of you that have enjoyed it, but it's not had the impact that I expected. But sometimes I think it's to do with the audience, you know, who follow me and what sort of books you like. And maybe Animal Farm, of course, new people can discover my channel and my videos. But you know, at the moment I've got just short of 17,000 subscribers, and I know a lot of you are big Lord of the Rings fans. There's still some of you that have found me through Harry Potter, some of you through the Chronicles of Narnia, which I've had to stop producing, which is such a shame. And some of you I know really like the live streams and things, and some of you found me through other things. But obviously, like, which videos are most popular on my channel and how you discover me in the first place is probably going to influence what books you enjoy going forward. And yeah, I guess Secret Garden fans, unless you're just fans of all sorts of classic literature and you can appreciate Dracula and you can appreciate Animal Farm and things that I do on the live streams, whether it's Sherlock Holmes or even modern things like To Marry a Prince. You know, some of you have got very, very, very broad tastes, which I think is wonderful. But A Little Princess, I feel like you couldn't do Secret Garden fans much better justice than doing A Little Princess. So I've been considering it for a very, very long time. But you know, I've started so many things and I don't always finish them. And so I've been anxious to start a new thing when I've got things not finished. But it's a shorter book than I thought. So like, I read chapter 1 today. I'll see what I can do. And I don't think I want to read it live. You know, I've got a lot of things going on the live streams. And sometimes I need to take breaks from live streams for various reasons. So I think I would like to present that in a very similar fashion to The Secret Garden. So I might see if I can actually buy the book and read it from the book rather than just doing it from the computer. So I think it would be really nice to give it a similar presentation to The Secret Garden as possible. And another story that I think suits fans of A Secret Garden in a slightly different way would be Wuthering Heights, and it's, you know, it's been mentioned here and there. I've mentioned it here and there. But to be fair, Jane Eyre as well, like either of those absolute classics by the Bronte sisters, I think would be ideal. Gives me a chance to play around with the genuine Yorkshire accent and everything. Similar time period. So yeah, I can imagine a lot of Secret Garden fans would enjoy Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, but especially A Little Princess, I think, with it being another one of Frances Hodgson Burnett's. A hiccup in the picture, yeah, but I don't like that. It generally is like that. It struggles with the video and the audio is okay. Yeah, it might just get a little bit choppy from time to time for some reason. But the Wi-Fi is supposed to be very, very good here, so we'll see. And this is Mr. and Mrs. Why is it not focusing now? It's been so well behaved. Come on now. Don't do me like this. It's been doing so good. Suddenly it doesn't want to focus. There you go. Tentative focusing. But this is Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins. I thought that was a pretty fun scene. What else did we have? This is the boy mouse testing out whether he can unscrew the cap. I don't know why it's struggling to focus now. Like, I understood it before when the lighting wasn't great back in the old place. It's okay from here. But it was doing so well earlier. But there you go, that's pretty nice. And Yeah, that's picture time. That's picture time. Okay, shall we get back into it? That break was... Oh, come on, Lynette. Come on. Stay with me. What time is it over there, though? It must be the early hours now for you. Like 1 o'clock or something. Oh, and my back's giving in now. I might just lie down here and read from a distance. No, I can't do that. Come on. Why is my back giving it? My back's giving in. I'm getting old. Come on. Okay. And this is technically chapter 18. In the kitchen. The time has come, my grandmother said. The great moment has arrived. Are you ready, my darling? It was exactly 7:30. Bruno was in the bowl finishing that 4th banana. Hang on, he said. Just a few more bites. No, my grandmother said. We've got to go. She picked him up and held him tight in her hand. She was very tense and nervous. I'd never seen her like that before. I'm going to put you both in my handbag now, she said, but I shall leave the clasp undone. She popped Bruno into it first. I waited, clutching the little bottle to my chest. Now you, she said. She picked me up and gave me a kiss on the nose. Good luck, my darling. Oh, by the way, you do realise you've got a tail, don't you? A what? I said. A tail. A long curly tail. I must say that never occurred to me, I said. Good gracious me, so I have. I can see it now. I can actually move it. It is rather grand, isn't it? I mention it only because it might come in useful when you're climbing about in the kitchen, my grandmother said. You can curl it around, and you can hook it onto things, and you can swing from it and lower yourself to the ground from high places. I wish I'd known this before, I said. I could have practiced using it. Too late now, my grandmother said. We've got to go. She popped me into her handbag with Bruno, and at once I took up my usual perch in the small side pocket so that I could poke my head out and see what was going on. My grandmother picked up her walking stick, and out she went into the corridor to the lift. She pressed the button, and the lift came up, and she got in. There was no one in there with us. Listen, she said. I won't be able to talk to you much once we're in the dining room. If I do, people will think I'm dotty and talking to myself. The lift reached the ground floor and stopped with a jerk. My grandmother walked out of it and crossed the lobby of the hotel and entered the dining room. It was a huge room with gold decorations on the ceiling and big mirrors around the walls. The regular guests always had their tables reserved for them, and most of them were already in their places and starting to eat their suppers. Waiters were buzzing about all over the place, carrying plates and dishes. Our table was a small one beside the right-hand wall about halfway down the room. My grandmother made her way to it and sat down. Peeping out of the handbag, I could see in the very centre of the room 2 long tables that were not yet occupied. Each of them carried a notice fixed onto a sort of silver stick, and the notices said, "Reserved for members of the RSPCC." My grandmother looked towards the long tables, but said nothing. She unfolded her napkin and spread it over the handbag on her lap. Her hand slid under the napkin and took hold of me gently. With the napkin covering me, she lifted me up close to her face and whispered,
"I'm about to put you on the floor under the table. The tablecloth reaches almost to the ground so no one will see you. Have you got hold of the bottle?" "Yes," I whispered back. "I'm ready, Grandmamma."
Just then, a waiter in a black suit came and stood by our table. I could see his legs from under the napkin, and as soon as I heard his voice, I knew who he was. His name was William. "Good evening, madam," he said to my grandmother. "Where is the little gentleman tonight?" "He's not feeling very well," my grandmother said. "He's staying in his room." "I'm sorry to hear that," William said. "Today there is green pea soup to start with, and for the main course you have a choice of either grilled fillet of sole or roast lamb." "Pea soup and lamb for me, please," my grandmother said. "But don't hurry it, William. I'm in no rush tonight. In fact, you can bring me a glass of dry sherry first." "Of course, madam," William said, and he went away. My grandmother pretended she had dropped something, and as she bent down, she slid me out from under the napkin onto the floor under the table.
"Go, darling, go,"
she whispered. Then she straightened up again. I was on my own now. I stood clasping the little bottle. I knew exactly where the door into the kitchen was. I had to go about halfway round the enormous dining room to reach it. Here goes, I thought. And like a flash, I skittled out from under the table and made for the wall. I had no intention of going across the dining room floor. It was far too risky. My plan was to cling close to the skirting of the wall all the way round until I reached the kitchen door. I ran. Oh, how I ran. I don't think anyone saw me. They were all too busy eating. But to reach the door leading to the kitchen, I had to cross the main entrance to the dining room. I was just about to do this when in poured a great flood of females. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the bottle. At first I saw only the shoes and ankles of these women who were surging in through the door, but when I glanced up a bit higher, I knew at once who they were. They were the witches coming in to dinner. I waited until they had all passed me by. Then I dashed on towards the kitchen door. A waiter opened it to go in. I nipped in after him and hid behind a big garbage bin on the floor. I stayed there for several minutes, just listening to all the talk and the racket. By golly, what a place that kitchen was! The noise, and the steam, and the clatter of pots and pans, and the cooks all shouting, and the waiters all rushing in and out from the dining room, yelling the food orders to the cooks. 4 soups and 2 lambs and 2 fish for table 28. 3 apple pies and 2 strawberry ice creams for number 17. Stuff like that going on all the time. Not far above my head there was a handle sticking out from the side of the garbage bin. Still clutching the bottle, I gave a leap, turned a somersault in the air, and caught hold of the handle with the end of my tail. Suddenly there I was, swinging to and fro upside down. It was terrific. I loved it. This
I told myself, is how a trapeze artist in a circus must feel as he goes swishing through the air high up in the circus tent. The only difference was that his trapeze could only swing backwards and forwards. My trapeze, my tail, could swing me in any direction I wanted. Perhaps I would become a circus mouse after all. Just then, a waiter came in with a plate in his hand, and I heard him saying, "The old hag on table 14 says that this meat is too tough. She wants another portion." One of the cooks said, "Give me a plate." I dropped to the floor and peeped round the garbage bin. I saw the cook scrape the meat off the plate and slap another bit on. Then he said, "Come on, boys, give her some gravy," and carried the plate round to everyone in the kitchen, and do you know what they did? Every one of those cooks and kitchen boys spat onto the old lady's plate. "See how she likes it now," said the cook, handing the plate back to the waiter. Quite soon another waiter came in and he shouted, "Everyone in the big RSPCC party wants the soup." That's when I started sitting up and taking notice. I was all ears now. I edged a bit further round the garbage bin so that I could see everything that was going on in the kitchen. A man with a tall white hat, who must have been the head chef, shouted, "Put the soup for the big party in the large silver soup tureen." I saw the head chef place a huge silver basin onto the wooden side bench that ran along the whole length of the kitchen against the opposite wall. "Into that silver basin is where the soup is going," I told myself. "So that's where the stuff in my little bottle must go as well." I noticed that high up near the ceiling, above the side bench, there was a long shelf crammed with saucepans and frying pans. "If I can somehow clamber up onto that shelf," I thought, "then I've got it made. I shall be directly above the silver basin. But first I must somehow get across to the side of the kitchen and then up onto the middle shelf." A great idea came to me. Once again, I jumped up and hooked my tail around the handle of the garbage bin. Then, hanging upside down, I began to swing. Higher and higher I swung. I was remembering the trapeze artist in the circus I'd seen last Easter, and the way he had got the trapeze swinging higher and higher and higher, and had then let go and gone flying through the air. So, just at the right moment, at the top of my swing, I let go with my tail and went soaring clear across the kitchen and made a perfect landing on the middle shelf. By golly, I thought, what marvellous things a mouse can do, and I'm only a beginner. No one had seen me. They were all far too busy with their pots and pans. From the middle shelf, I somehow managed to shinny up a little water pipe in the corner, and in no time at all, I was up on the very top shelf just under the ceiling, among all the saucepans and the frying pans. I knew that no one could possibly see me up there. It was a super position, and I began working my way along the shelf until I was directly above the big empty silver basin they were going to pour the soup into. I put down my bottle. I unscrewed the top and crept to the edge of the shelf and quickly poured what was in it straight into the silver basin below. The next moment, one of the cooks came along with a gigantic saucepan of steaming green soup and poured the whole lot into the silver basin. He put the lid on the basin and shouted, "Soup for the big party, all ready to go out!" Then a waiter arrived and carried the silver basin away. I had done it.
Even if I never got back alive to my grandmother, the witches were still going to get the mouse maker. I left the empty bottle behind a large saucepan and began working my way back along the top shelf. It was much easier to move about without the bottle. I began using my tail more and more. I swung from the handle of one saucepan to the handle of another all the way along that top shelf, while far below me cooks and waiters were all bustling about, and kettles were steaming, and pans were spluttering, and pots were boiling. And I thought to myself, oh boy, this is the life. What fun it is to be a mouse doing an exciting job like this. I kept on swinging. I swung most marvellously from handle to handle, and I was enjoying myself so much that I completely forgot I was in full view of anyone in the kitchen who might happen to glance upwards. What came next happened so quickly I had no time to save myself. I heard a man's voice yelling, "A mouse! Look at that dirty little mouse!" And I caught a glimpse below me of a white-coated figure in a tall white hat, and then there was a flash of steel as the carving knife whizzed through the air, and there was a shoot of pain in the end of my tail, and suddenly I was falling and falling head first towards the floor. Even as I fell, I knew just what had happened. I knew that the tip of my tail had been cut off and that I was about to crash onto the floor and everyone in the kitchen would be after me. "A mouse!" they were shouting. "A mouse! A mouse! Catch it quick!" I hit the floor and jumped up and ran for my life. All around me there were big black boots going stamp, 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 and I dodged around them and ran and ran and ran, twisting and turning and dodging and swerving across the kitchen floor. "Get it!" they were shouting. "Kill it! Stamp on it!" The whole floor seemed to be full of black boots stamping away at me, and I dodged and swerved and twisted and turned, and then in sheer desperation, hardly knowing what I was doing, wanting only a place to hide, I ran up the trouser leg of one of the cooks and clung to his sock. "Hey!" the cook shouted. "Jeepers creepers, he's gone up my trouser! Hold on, boys, I'll get him this time." The man's hands began slapping at the trouser leg, and now I really was going to get smashed if I didn't move quickly. There was only one way to go, and that was up. I dug my little claws into the hairy skin of the man's leg and scuttled upwards, higher and higher, past the calf and past the knee, and on to the thigh. "Holy smoke!" the man was yelling. "It's going all the way up! It's going right up my leg!" I heard shrieks of laughter coming from the other cooks, but I can promise you I wasn't laughing myself. I was running for my life. The man's hands were slapping all around me, and he was jumping up and down as though he was standing on hot bricks. And I kept climbing and I kept dodging, and very soon I reached the very top of the trouser leg, and there was nowhere else to go. "Help! Help! Help!" the man was screaming. "It's in my knickers! It's running round in my flaming knickers! Get it out! Someone help me to get it out!" "Take off your trousers, you silly slob!" someone else shouted. "Ha! Pull down your pants and we'll soon catch him." I was in the middle of the man's trousers now, in the place where the two trouser legs meet and the zip begins. It was dark and awfully hot in there. I knew I had to keep going. I dashed onward and found the top of the other trouser leg. I went down it like greased lightning and came out at the bottom of it, and once again I was on the floor. I heard the stupid cook still shouting, "It's in my trousers! Get it out! Will somebody please help me to get it out before it bites me?" I caught a flashing glimpse of the entire kitchen staff crowding round him and laughing their heads off, and nobody saw the little brown mouse as it flew across the floor and dived into a sack of potatoes. burrowed down in among the dirty potatoes and held my breath. The cook must have started taking his trousers right off, because now they were shouting, "It's not in there! There's no mouse in there, you silly twerp!" There was! The man was shouting back. "You've never had a mouse in your trousers. You don't know what it feels like." The fact that a tiny little creature like me had caused such a commotion among a bunch of grown-up men gave me a happy feeling. I couldn't help smiling in spite of the pain in my tail. I stayed where I was until I was sure they had forgotten about me. Then I crept out of the potatoes and cautiously poked my tiny head over the edge of the sack. Once again, the kitchen was all of a bustle, with cooks and waiters rushing about everywhere. I saw the waiter who had come in earlier with the complaint about tough meat coming in again. "Hey, boys," he shouted. "I asked the old hag if the new bit of meat was any better, and she said it was perfectly delicious. She said it was really tasty." I had to get out of that kitchen and back to my grandmother. There was only one way to do this. I must make a dash clear across the floor and out through the door behind one of the waiters. I stayed quite still, watching for my chance. My tail was hurting terribly. I curled it round so as to have a look at it. About 2 inches of it were missing, and it was bleeding quite a lot. There was a waiter loading up with a batch of plates full of pink ice cream. He had a plate in each hand and 2 more balanced on each arm. He went towards the door. He pushed it open with his shoulder. I leapt out of the sack of potatoes and went across that kitchen floor and into the dining room like a streak of light. And I didn't stop running until I was underneath my grandmother's table. It was lovely to see my grandmother's feet again in those old-fashioned black shoes with their straps and buttons. I shinned up one of her legs and landed on her lap. "Hello, Grandmama," I whispered. "I'm back. I did it. I poured it all into their soup." Her hand came down and caressed me. "Well done, my darling," she whispered back. "Well done, you. They are at this very moment eating that soup." Suddenly she withdrew her hand. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "My darling, what's happened to you?" "One of the cooks cut off my tail with a carving knife," I whispered back. "It hurts like a billy-o." "Let me look at it," she said. She bent her head and examined my tail. "You poor little thing," she whispered. "I'm going to bandage it up with my handkerchief. That will stop the bleeding." She fished a small lace-edged handkerchief out of her bag, and this she somehow managed to wrap around the end of my tail. "You'll be all right now," she said. "Just try to forget about it. Did you really manage to pour the whole bottle into their soup?" "Every drop," I said. "Do you think you could put me where I can watch them?" "Yes," she answered. "My handbag is on your own empty chair beside me. I'm going to pop you in there now, and you can peep out as long as you are careful not to be seen. Bruno is there as well, but take no notice of him. I gave him a roll to eat, and that's keeping him busy for a while." Her hand closed around me, and I was lifted off her lap and transferred to the handbag. "Hello, Bruno," I said.
"This is a great roll,"
he said, nibbling away in the bottom of the bag.
"But I wish there was butter on it."
I peered over the top of the handbag. I could see the witches quite clearly sitting at their 2 long tables in the centre of the room. They had finished their pea soup now, and the waiters were clearing away the plates. My grandmother had lit up one of her disgusting black cigars and was puffing smoke over everything. All around us, the summer holiday guests in this rather grand hotel were babbling away and tucking into their suppers. About half of them were old people with walking sticks, but there were also plenty of families with a husband, a wife, and several children. They were all well-to-do people. You had to be if you wanted to stay in the Hotel Magnificent.
"That's her, Grandmama," I whispered. "That's the Grand High Witch."
"I know," my grandmother whispered back.
"She's the tiny one in black sitting at the head of the nearest table." "She could kill you," I whispered. "She could kill anyone in this room with her white-hot sparks."
"Look out," my grandmother whispered.
"The waiter's coming."
I popped down out of sight, and I heard William saying, "Your roast lamb, madam. And which vegetable would you like? Peas or carrots?"
"Carrots, please,"
my grandmother said.
"But no potatoes."
I heard the carrots being dished out. There was a pause. Then my grandmother's voice was whispering,
"It's all right. He's gone."
I popped my head up again.
"Surely no one will notice my little head sticking out like this," I whispered.
"No," she answered. "I don't suppose they will. My problem is I've got to talk to you without moving my lips."
"You're doing beautifully," I said. "I've counted the witches," she said. "There aren't nearly as many as you thought. You were just guessing, weren't you, when you said 200? "It just seemed like 200, I said. "I was wrong too," my grandmother said. "I thought there were a lot more witches than this in England." "How many are there?" I asked. 84, she said. "There were 85, I said, "but one of them got fried."
At that moment, I caught sight of Mr. Jenkins, Bruno's father, heading straight for our table.
"Look out, Grandmama," I whispered. "Here comes Bruno's father."
So this is technically chapter 19. I hope everybody's doing okay. Let's continue. Mr. Jenkins and his son. Mr. Jenkins came striding up to our table with a very purposeful look on his face. "Where is that grandson of yours?" he said to my grandmother. He spoke rudely and looked very angry. My grandmother put on her frostiest look, but didn't answer him. "My guess is that he and my son Bruno are up to some devilment," Mr. Jenkins went on. "Bruno hasn't turned up for his supper, and it takes a lot to make that boy miss his food." "I must admit he has a very healthy appetite," my grandmother said. "My feeling is that you're in on this as well," Mr. Jenkins said. "I don't know who the devil you are, and I don't much care, but you played a nasty trick on me and my wife this afternoon. You put a dirty little mouse on the table. That makes me think all three of you are up to something. So if you know where Bruno's hiding, kindly tell me at once."
That was no trick I played on you, my grandmother said. That mouse I tried to give you was your own little boy, Bruno. I was being kind to you. I was trying to restore him to the bosom of his family. You refused to take him in.
What the blazes do you mean, madam? Shouted Mr. Jenkins. My son isn't a mouse.
His black moustache was jumping up and down like a crazy as he spoke.
Come on, woman! Where is he? Out with it!
The family at the table nearest to us had all stopped eating and was staring at Mr. Jenkins. My grandmother sat there, puffing away calmly at her black cigar. I can well understand your anger, Mr. Jenkins, she said. Any other English father would be just as cross as you are. But over in Norway, where I come from, we are quite used to these sorts of happenings. We have learnt to accept them as part of everyday life.
You must be mad, woman, cried Mr. Jenkins. Where is Bruno? If you don't tell me at once, I shall summon the police.
Bruno is a mouse, my grandmother said, calm as ever.
He most certainly is not a mouse, shouted Mr. Jenkins.
Oh, yes, I am,
Bruno said, poking his head up out of the handbag. Mr. Jenkins leapt about 3 feet into the air.
Hello, Dad,
Bruno said. He had a silly sort of mousy grin on his face. Mr. Jenkins's mouth dropped open so wide I could see the gold fillings in his back teeth.
Don't worry, Dad,
Bruno went on.
It's not as bad as all that. Just so long as the cat doesn't get me.
Bruno,
stammered Mr. Jenkins.
No more school,
said Bruno, grinning a broad and asinine mouse grin.
No more homework. I shall live in the kitchen cupboard and feast on raisins and honey.
But Bruno,
stammered Mr. Jenkins again.
How did this happen?
The poor man had no wind left in his sails at all. Witches, my grandmother said. The witches did it.
I can't have a mouse for a son, shrieked Mr. Jenkins.
You've got one, my grandmother said. Be nice to him, Mr. Jenkins.
Mrs. Jenkins will go crazy,
yelled Mr. Jenkins.
She can't stand the things.
She'll just have to get used to him, my grandmother said. I hope you don't keep a cat in the house.
We do, cried Mr. Jenkins. Topsy is my wife's favourite creature.
Then you'll just have to get rid of Topsy, my grandmother said. Your son is more important than your cat.
He certainly is,
Bruno shouted from inside the handbag.
You tell Mum she's got to get rid of Topsy before I go home.
By now, half the dining room was watching our little group. Knives and forks and spoons had been put down, and all over the place heads were turning round to stare at Mr. Jenkins as he stood there, spluttering and shouting. They couldn't see either Bruno or me, and they were wondering what all the fuss was about. By the way, my grandmother said, would you like to know who did this to him? There was a mischievous little smile on her face, and I could see that she was about to get Mr. Jenkins into trouble.
Who? He cried. Who did it?
That woman over there, my grandmother said. The small one in a black dress at the head of the long table.
She's our SPCC, cried Mr. Jenkins. She's the chairwoman.
No, she's not, my grandmother said. She's the Grand High Witch of all the world.
You mean she did it? That skinny little woman over there? Shouted Mr. Jenkins, pointing at her with a long finger. By gad, I'll have my lawyers onto her for this. I'll make her pay through the nose. I wouldn't do anything rash, my grandmother said to him. That woman has magic powers. She might decide to turn you into something even sillier than a mouse. A cockroach, perhaps. Turn me into a cockroach? Shouted Mr. Jenkins, puffing out his chest. I'd like to see her try. He swung around and started marching across the dining room towards the Grand High Witch's table. My grandmother and I watched him. Bruno had jumped up onto our table and was also watching his father. Practically everyone in the dining room was watching Mr. Jenkins now. I stayed where I was, peeping out of my grandmother's handbag. I thought it might be wiser to stay put. The Triumph. Mr. Jenkins had not gone more than a few paces towards the Grand High Witch's table, when a piercing scream rose high above all the other noises in the room, and at the same moment I saw the Grand High Witch go shooting up into the air. Now she was standing on her chair, still screaming. Now she was on the tabletop, waving her arms. What on earth's happening, Grandmamma? Wait, my grandmother said. Keep quiet and watch. Suddenly all the other witches, more than 80 of them, were beginning to scream and jump out of their seats as though spikes were being stuck into their bottoms. Some were standing on chairs, some were up on the tables, and all of them were wiggling about and waving their arms in the most extraordinary manner. Then, all at once, they became quiet. Then they stiffened. Every single witch stood there as stiff and silent as a corpse. The whole room became deathly still. They're shrinking, Grandmamma, I said. They're shrinking just like I did. I know they are, my grandmother said. It's the mouse maker, I cried. Look, some of them are growing fur on their faces. Why is it working so quickly, Grandmamma? I'll tell you why, my grandmother said. Because all of them have had massive overdoses, just like you. It's thrown the alarm clock right out of whack. Everyone in the dining room was standing up now to get a better view. People were moving closer. They were beginning to crowd round the two long tables. My grandmother lifted Bruno and me up so that we wouldn't miss any of the fun. In her excitement, she jumped up onto her chair so that she could see over the heads of the crowd. In another few seconds, all the witches had completely disappeared, and the tops of the two long tables were swarming with small brown mice. All over the dining room, women were screaming and strong men were turning white in the face and shouting, It's crazy! This can't happen! Let's get the heck out of here, quick! Waiters were attacking the mice with chairs and wine bottles and anything else they had at hand. I saw a chef in a tall white hat rushing out from the kitchen brandishing a frying pan. And another one just behind him was wielding a carving knife above his head, and everyone was yelling, Mice! 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 We must get rid of the mice! Only the children in the room were really enjoying it. They all seemed to know instinctively that something good was going on right there in front of them. and they were clapping and cheering and laughing like mad. "It's time to go," my grandmother said. "Our work is done." She got down off her chair and picked up her handbag and slung it over her arm. She had me in her right hand and Bruno in her left. "Bruno," she said, "the time has come to restore you to the famous bosom of your family."
"My mum's not very crazy about mice,"
Bruno said. "So I noticed," my grandmother said. "She'll just have to get used to you, won't she?" It was not difficult to find Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins. You could hear Mrs. Jenkins' shrill voice all over the room.
"Herbert!"
it was screaming.
"Herbert! Get me out of here! There's mice everywhere! They'll go up my skirts!"
She had her arms high up around her husband, and from where I was, she seemed to be swinging from his neck. My grandmother advanced upon them and thrust Bruno into Mr. Jenkins' hand. "Here is your little boy," she said. "He needs to go on a diet."
"Hi, Dad,"
Bruno said.
"Hi, Mum."
Mrs. Jenkins screamed even louder. My grandmother, with me in her hand, turned and marched out of the room. She went straight across the hotel lobby and out through the front entrance into the open air. Outside it was a lovely warm evening, and I could hear the waves breaking on the beach just across the road from the hotel. "Is there a taxi here?" my grandmother said to the tall doorman in his green uniform. "Certainly, madam," he said, and he put 2 fingers into his mouth and blew a long, shrill whistle. I watched him with envy. For weeks I'd been trying to whistle like that, but I hadn't succeeded once. Now I never would. The taxi came. The driver was an oldish man with a thick, black, drooping moustache. The moustache hung over his mouth like the roots of some plant. "Where to, madam?" he asked. Suddenly he caught sight of me, a little mouse, nestling in my grandmother's hand. "Blimey!" he said. "What's that?" "It's my grandson," my grandmother said. "Drive us to the station, please." "I always liked mice," the old taxi driver said. "I used to keep hundreds of them when I was a boy. Mice is the fastest breeders in the world. Did you know that, Mom? So if he's your grandson, then I reckon you'll be having a few great-grandsons to go with him in a couple of weeks' time." "Drive us to the station, please," my grandmother said, looking prim. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Right away." My grandmother got into the back of the taxi and sat down and put me on her lap. "Are we going home?" I asked her. "Yes," she answered. "Back to Norway." "Hooray!" I cried. "Oh, hooray, hooray, hooray!" "I thought you'd like that," she said. "But what about our luggage?" "Who cares about luggage?" she said. The taxi was driving through the streets of Bournemouth, and this was the time of day when the pavements were crowded with holidaymakers all wandering about aimlessly with nothing to do. "How are you feeling, my darling?" my grandmother said. "Fine," I said. "Quite marvellous." She began stroking the fur on the back of my neck with one finger. "We have accomplished great feats today," she said. "It's been terrific," I said. "Absolutely terrific."
Okay, I have brutally misrepresented the length of this book. So that wasn't the finale, but it doesn't matter. I don't know how I missed that. I think because there was a really, really long one previously. I think when I was just like grabbing through, I thought that this like whole bit here was the last bit. I'm such a silly sausage. But it doesn't matter. It does not matter. Although I'm instantly missing the Grand High Witch. I was really hoping there was going to be some more Grand High Witch, but never mind. We had some fun chapters with her previously. I thought she'd have some like famous last words, you know. I couldn't remember how it went. It's such a long time since I read this. Okay, so there's 2 bonus chapters. 2 bonus chapters, alright? So I'm going to have to... It's because they don't have chapter numbers. So I'm going to have to do some counting back and make sure that I document all this correctly. Okay. 2 bonus chapters coming up. I know it's a long little short story, isn't it? But it's also because like I read quite slowly at times, and you know I pause little bits, and obviously there's like the picture time and everything. Okay, I'll do one final picture time before the final picture time. But I guess that was the finale in some sense. That was the sort of crescendo moment. So pictures. Oh wow, there's all this, yeah, from before the disconnect. So yeah, pictures before the finale. Oh, you're very welcome, everybody. You're very welcome. If it hadn't have been for the, you know, for the power cut and then for this disconnection, it would have felt quite smooth. I mean, it was longer than I expected because, like I said, I was planning I was going to prepare a little bit better than this and do like a witches marathon and finish the whole thing off just in one stream. And then I decided like, no, I've not been streaming for a while. I'll just do Hobbit chapter 3 more chapters, and then I'll finish off the rest in the next one. And then underestimating how much was left. And it's funny because I think when I'd last looked at it, you know, a couple of months back, like looked at it properly, I had been surprised at how many chapters were to go. So then when I'd looked at it today, and I was like, oh, there's only 7 to go, actually. I could maybe squish it out. And I was like, oh, but I'm going to do The Hobbit and warm up with that. And then I did those 3 in a good flow. Oh, there's only 4 more. But there wasn't 4 more. There was 6 more. And then we've had disconnects and stuff. But don't you worry. No, thanks, everybody. I'm just really happy you're enjoying it. It's really great. And it'll be lovely to have completed the book as well. It's really, really nice. Thanks ever so much. So we had William the waiter coming for the order. I hope I didn't mix up the voices there. There was no clear indicator that William can't have been the one that said some old lady thinks the food's too tough and they spat. That can't have been grandmother's food. I don't think so. I'm really hoping that was a separate... Yeah, it must have been a separate waiter because the boy would have said that William said it as he just said the waiter because he knew William's name. So no, I was worried that I was mixing up the voices there, but no, they were separate. They were separate waiters. So anyway, here is William coming to take Grandmama's order. And then we have the start. Sorry, this is not oh, there we go. It's not focusing as well as it was earlier when there was lighting outside as well. But yeah, the start of the dash. And goodness me, the boy as the mouse, he does well. Whilst carrying that bottle as well, that is impressive. That is seriously impressive.
And then this is the chaos of the kitchen. Organised chaos, though, and apart from some pretty messed up behaviour going on with the spitting and the food, I think the boy was quite impressed with the whole thing. So, and then we have some action shots. I like how they squeeze these in among the writing. It's really nice. So he's trying out his tail acrobatics, swinging from handle to handle. And up he pops onto the top shelf and starts his dash across, sees the saucepan below and pours the delayed action mouse maker. The plan is going swimmingly until he gets a little bit carried away. Gets a little bit carried away with the acrobatics, is enjoying his tail so much, and in pure Roald Dahl fashion, boom. You have to have some carving knife, mouse tail amputation action. This kind of behaviour, you know, gloating in a way, takes his eye off the ball. It's got to be punished in Roald Dahl's brutally realistic world. You know, brutally realistic, however zany and fantastical. And the poor boy has his tail sliced. And then the escape begins. He could have had a relatively easy way out, perhaps, and remained unscathed, but here we go. The black boots, the stomping, and up the trouser leg of the unwitting chef of some description he was. And this is the other chefs realizing that there's some shenanigans going on and calling out for him to take his trousers off and everything and get rid of the mouse. I wonder if this is even supposed to be the knife that had chopped his tail. It feels like there's a little bit of blood there at the bottom. Rather gruesome. Whoops, sorry, I went a bit close. But yeah, shocked faces. Dropped knife. But he seems to have disappeared. Oh, there wasn't a mouse. Bosh, gone. And into the potatoes he goes. Look at his little mousy nose sticking out of the spud bag. Out at taties. And the grandmama wisely says that she'll skip the potatoes. Probably thinks that there's maybe some of her grandson's blood in there. Although you'd hope they've already prepared them, but she's gone off the idea of potatoes. And then here is the witch with her first aid skills, rather impressive mouse adapted first aid skills, wrapping her black lacy handkerchief around his tail, stopping the bleeding. No worries, job's a good un. And then in comes good old Mr. Jenkins. Hey up. It's only old chuffing Mr. Jenkins, innit? Coming in, causing a commotion. He's like the wet. That's not me chuffing, son. It's a bloody mouse, woman. What you talking about? And the grandmama says, look, it is. Bruno pipes up. Then he's got to believe it. And she says, oi, the Grand-Eye Witch did it. But just then, maybe this saved his bacon. He might have been frazzled himself, but woof. The delayed action mouse maker Good old Formula 86. It's a classic. We all know it. We all know it. There it is in full effect. Alarm clocks out the window. The witches are mice. Bish, bosh, bash. Goodbye, all 84 remaining witches of England. Unless one of them maybe skipped the suit, maybe one could be ill up in the hotel room, maybe one's left early, had other arrangements, who knows. There might be a Witches 2 coming soon that we just don't know about. The long-awaited sequel of The Witches, Revenge of the Witch, and she's become not only the only remaining witch in England, but she has taken the place of the Grand High Witch of
England and all of the world.
This could be a sequel. This could be a sequel. But as far as we are aware, all the witches of
England
have been mouseified. Completely and utterly mouseified. Full mouse action. And it's not going to focus on the book, but it's okay. Nope. No, it's tired. The webcam is tired. And then oh, what did I say? What did I say? Did I say grandson's skills? Oh. Did I say Grand High Witches skills? Oh, did I say the witches? It's okay. Yeah, you can let me off. And then we have the doorman whistling for the cab. Grandmama looks very pleased with herself, and the boy mouse just plain chilling. And look at this as well. Not mentioned in the story. But there's a completely KO'd little mouse here. I'm guessing that's one of the witches that's croaked. Brutal. Brutal. Alright. So, 2 chapters to go. We are finishing Roald Dahl's The Witches on the Foxy Book Club. Okay. The Heart of a Mouse. It was lovely to be back in Norway once again in my grandmother's fine old house. But now that I was so small, everything looked different, and it took me quite a while to find my way around. Mine was a world of carpets and table legs and chair legs, and the little crannies behind large pieces of furniture. A closed door could not be opened, and nothing could be reached that was on a table. But after a few days, my grandmother began to invent gadgets for me in order to make life a bit easier. She got a carpenter to put together a number of slim, tall step ladders, and she placed one of these against each table in the house that I could climb up whenever I wanted to. She herself invented a wonderful door-opening device made out of wires and springs and pulleys, with heavy weights dangling on cords, and soon every door in the house had a door opener on it. All I had to do was to press my front paws onto a tiny wooden platform, and hey presto, a spring would stretch and a weight would drop, and the door would swing open. Next, she rigged up an equally ingenious system whereby I could switch on the light whenever I entered a room at night. I cannot explain how it worked because I know nothing about electricity, but there was a little button let into the floor near the door in every room in the house, and when I pressed the button gently with one paw, the light would come on. When I pressed it a second time, the light would go off again. My grandmother made me a tiny toothbrush, using a matchstick for the handle, and into this she stuck little bits of bristle that she had snipped off one of her hairbrushes. "You must not get any holes in your teeth," she said. "I can't take a mouse to a dentist. He'd think I was crazy." "It's funny," I said, "but ever since I became a mouse, I've hated the taste of sweets and chocolate, so I don't think I'll get any holes." "You are still going to brush your teeth after every meal," my grandmother said. And I did. For a bathtub, she gave me a silver sugar basin, and I bathed in it every night before going to bed. She allowed no one else into the house, not even a servant or a cook. We kept entirely to ourselves, and we were very happy in each other's company. One evening, as I lay on my grandmother's lap in front of the fire, she said to me, "I wonder what happened to that little Bruno. I won't be surprised if his father gave him to the hall porter to drown in the fire bucket," I answered. "I'm afraid you may be right," my grandmother said. "The poor little thing." We were silent for a few minutes, my grandmother puffing away at her black cigar, while I dozed comfortably in the warmth. "Can I ask you something, Grandmamma?" I said. "Ask me anything you like, my darling." "How long does a mouse live?" "Ah," she said. "I've been waiting for you to ask me that." There was a silence. She sat there, smoking away and gazing at the fire. "Well," I said, "how long do we live, us mice?" "I have been reading about mice," she said. "I've been trying to find out everything I can about them." "Go on then, Grandmamma. Why don't you tell me?" "If you really want to know," she said, "I'm afraid a mouse doesn't live for a very long time." "How long?" I asked. "Well, an ordinary mouse only lives for about 3 years," she said. "But you are not an ordinary mouse. You are a mouse person, and that is a very different matter." "How different?" I asked. "How long does a mouse person live, Grandmamma?" "Longer," she said. "Much longer. A mouse person will almost certainly live for 3 times as long as an ordinary mouse," my grandmother said. "About 9 years." "Good!" I cried. "That's great! It's the best news I've ever had." "Why do you say that?" she asked, surprised. "Because I would never want to live longer than you," I said. "I couldn't stand being looked after by anybody else." There was a short silence. She had a way of fondling me behind the ears with the tip of one finger. It felt lovely. "How old are you, Grandmamma?" I asked. "I'm 86, she said. "Will you live another 8 or 9 years?" "I might," she said, "with a bit of luck." "You've got to," I said, "because by then I'll be a very old mouse, and you'll be a very old grandmother, and soon after that we'll both die together." "That would be perfect," she said. I had a little doze after that. I just shut my eyes and thought of nothing, and felt at peace with the world.
Would you like me to tell you something about yourself that is very interesting? My grandmother said. Yes, please, Grandmamma, I said, without opening my eyes. I couldn't believe it at first, but apparently it's quite true, she said. What is it? I asked. The heart of a mouse, she said, and that means your heart, is beating at the rate of 500 times a minute. Isn't that amazing? That's not possible, I said, opening my eyes wide. It's as true as I'm sitting here, she said. It's a sort of miracle. That's nearly 9 beats every second, I cried, working it out in my head. Correct, she said. Your heart is going so fast it's impossible to hear the separate beats. All one hears is a soft humming sound. She was wearing a lace dress, and the lace kept tickling my nose. I had to rest my head on my front paws. Have you ever heard my heart humming away, Grandmamma? I asked her. Often, she said. I hear it when you are lying very close to me on the pillow at night. The two of us remained silent in front of the fire for a long time after that, thinking about these wonderful things. My darling, she said at last, are you sure you don't mind being a mouse for the rest of your life? I don't mind at all, I said. It doesn't matter who you are or what you look like, so long as somebody loves you. The real final chapter. It's off to work we go. For supper that evening, my grandmother had a plain omelette and 1 slice of bread. I had a piece of that brown Norwegian goat's milk cheese known as Gjetost, which I had loved even when I was a boy. We ate in front of the fire, my grandmother in her armchair, and me on the table with my cheese on a small plate. Grandmamma, I said, now that we have done away with the Grand High Witch, will all the other witches in the world gradually disappear? I'm quite sure they won't, she answered. I stopped chewing and stared at her. But they must, I cried. Surely they must. I'm afraid not, she said. But if she's not there any longer, how are they going to get all the money they need? And who is going to give them orders and jazz them up at the annual meetings and invent all their magic formulas for them? When a queen bee dies, there is always another queen in the hive ready to take her place, my grandmother said. It's the same with witches. In the great headquarters where the Grand High Witch lives, there is always another Grand High Witch waiting in the wings to take over should anything happen. Oh no, I cried. That means everything we did was for nothing. Have I become a mouse for nothing at all? We saved the children of England, she said. I don't call that nothing. I know, I cried. But that's not nearly good enough. I felt sure that all the witches of the world would slowly fade away after we had got rid of their leader. Now you tell me that everything is going to go on just the same as before. Not exactly as before, my grandmother said. For instance, There are no longer any witches in England. That's quite a triumph, isn't it? But what about the rest of the world? I cried. What about America and France and Holland and Germany? And what about Norway? You must not think I have been sitting back and doing nothing these last few days, she said. I've been giving a great deal of thought and time to that particular problem. I was looking up at her face when she said this, and all at once I noticed that a little secret smile was beginning to spread slowly around her eyes and the corners of her mouth. "Why are you smiling, Grandmamma?" I asked her. "I have some rather interesting news for you," she said. "What news?" "Shall I tell it to you right from the beginning?" "Yes, please," I said. "I like good news." She had finished her omelette, and I had had enough of my cheese. She wiped her lips with a napkin and said, "As soon as we arrived back in Norway, I picked up the telephone and made a call to England." "Who in England, Grandmamma?" "To the Chief of Police in Bournemouth, my darling. I told him I was the Chief of Police for the whole of Norway, and that I was interested in the peculiar happenings that had taken place recently in the Hotel Magnificent." "Now, hang on a sec, Grandmamma," I said. "There's no way an English policeman is going to believe that you are the head of the Norwegian police." "I am very good at imitating a man's voice," she said. Of course he believed me. The policeman in Bournemouth was honoured to get a call from the Chief of Police for the whole of Norway. "So what did you ask him?" "I asked him for the name and address of the lady who had been living in room 454 in the Hotel Magnificent, the one who disappeared." "You mean the Grand High Witch?" I cried. "Yes, my darling." "And did he give it to you?" "Naturally he gave it to me. One policeman will always help another policeman." "By golly, you've got a nerve, Grandmamma." "I wanted her address," my grandmother said. "But did he know her address?" "He did indeed. They had found her passport in her room, and her address was in it. It was also in the hotel register. Everyone who stays in a hotel has to put a name and address in the book." "But surely the Grand High Witch wouldn't have put her real name and address in the hotel register," I said. "Why ever not?" my grandmother said. "Nobody in the world had the faintest idea who she was except the other witches. Wherever she went, people simply knew her as a nice lady. You, my darling, and you alone, were the only non-witch ever to see her with her mask off. Even in her home district, in the village where she lived, people knew her as a kindly and very wealthy baroness who gave large sums of money to charity. I have checked up on that." I was getting excited now. "And that address you got, Grandmamma, that must have been the secret headquarters of the Grand High Witch." "It still is," my grandmother said. "And that will be where the new Grand High Witch is certain to be living at this very moment with her retinue of special assistant witches. Important rulers are always surrounded by a large retinue of assistants." "Where is her headquarters, Grandmamma?" I cried. "Tell me quick where it is." "It is a castle," my grandmother said. "And the fascinating thing is that in that castle will be all the names and addresses of all the witches in the world." How else could a Grand High Witch run her business? How else could she summon the witches of the various countries to their annual meetings? "Where is the castle, Grandmamma?" I cried impatiently. "Which country? Tell me quick."
guess, she said. Norway! I cried. Right first time, she answered. High up in the mountains above a small village. This was thrilling news. I did a little dance of excitement on the tabletop. My grandmother was getting pretty worked up herself, and now she heaved herself out of her chair and began pacing up and down the room, thumping the carpet with her stick. So we have work to do, you and I, she cried out. We have a great task ahead of us. Thank heavens you are a mouse. A mouse can go anywhere. All I'll have to do is put you down somewhere near the Grand High Witch's castle, and you will very easily be able to get inside it and creep around, looking and listening to your heart's content. I will, I answered. No one will ever see me. Moving about in a big castle will be child's play compared to going into a crowded kitchen full of cooks and waiters. You could spend days in there if necessary, my grandmother cried. In her excitement, she was waving her stick all over the place, and suddenly she knocked over a tall and very beautiful vase that went crashing onto the floor and smashed into a million pieces. Forget it, she said. It's only Ming. You could spend weeks in that castle if you wanted to, and they'd never know you were there. I myself would get a room in the village, and you could sneak out of the castle and have supper with me every night and tell me what was going on. I could, I cried out. And inside the castle I could go snooping around simply everywhere. But your main job, of course, my grandmother said, would be to destroy every witch in the place. That would really be the end of the whole organisation. Me? Destroy them? I cried. How could I do that? Can't you guess? She said. Tell me, I said. Mouse Maker! My grandmother shouted. Formula 86 delayed action mouse maker all over again. You will feed it to everyone in the castle by putting drops of it into their food. You do remember the recipe, don't you? Every bit of it, I answered. You mean we're going to make it ourselves? Why not? She cried. If they can make it, so can we. It's just a question of knowing what goes in it. Who's going to climb up the tall trees to get the Gruntle's eggs? I asked her. I will, she cried. I'll do it myself. There's plenty of life in this old dog yet. I think I'd better do that part of it, Grandmama. You might come a cropper. Those are just details, she cried, waving her stick again. We shall let nothing stand in our way. And what happens after that? I asked her. After the new Grand High Witch and everybody else in the castle have been turned into mice? Then the castle will be completely empty, and I shall come in and join you and... Wait, I cried. Hold on, Grandmama. I've just had a nasty thought. What nasty thought? She said. When the mouse maker turned me into a mouse, I said, I didn't become just any old, ordinary mouse that you can catch with mouse traps. I became a talking, thinking, intelligent mouse person who wouldn't go near a mouse trap. My grandmother stopped dead in her tracks. She already knew what was coming next. Therefore, I went on, if we use the mouse maker to turn the new Grand High Witch and all the other witches in the castle into mice, the whole place will be swarming with very clever, very nasty, very dangerous, talking, thinking mouse witches. They'll all be witches in mouse's clothing. And that, I added, could be very horrible indeed. By golly, you're right, she cried. That never occurred to me. I couldn't possibly take on a castle full of mouse witches, I said. Nor could I,
she said. They'd have to be got rid of at once. They'd have to be smashed and bashed and chopped up into little pieces exactly as they were in the Hotel Magnificent. I'm not doing that, I said. I couldn't anyway. I don't think you could either, Grandmama. And mousetraps wouldn't be the slightest use. By the way, I added, the Grand High Witch who did me in was wrong about mousetraps, wasn't she? Yes, yes, my grandmother said impatiently. But I'm not concerned with that Grand High Witch. She's been chopped up long ago by the hotel chef. It's the new Grand High Witch we've got to deal with now, the one up in the castle, and all her assistants. A Grand High Witch is bad enough when she's disguised as a lady. But just think of what she could do if she were a mouse. She could go anywhere. I've got it, I shouted, leaping about a foot in the air. I've got the answer. Tell me, my grandmother snapped. The answer is cats, I shouted. Bring on the cats. My grandmother stared at me. Then a great grin spread over her face and she shouted, It's brilliant! Absolutely brilliant! Shove half a dozen cats into that castle, I cried, and they'll kill every mouse in the place in 5 minutes. I don't care how clever they are. You're a magician, my grandmother shouted, starting to wave her stick about once again. Look out for the vases, Grandmama. To heck with the vases, she shouted. I'm so thrilled I don't care if I break the lot. Just one thing, I said. You've got to make absolutely sure I'm well out of the way myself before you put the cats in. That's a promise, she said. What will we do after the cats have killed all the mice? I asked her. I'll take all the cats back to the village and then you and I will have the castle completely to ourselves. And then? I said. Then we shall go through the records and get the names and addresses of all the witches in the whole wide world. And after that? I said, quivering with excitement. After that, my darling, the greatest task of all will begin for you and me. We shall pack our bags and go travelling all over the world. In every country we visit, we shall seek out the houses where the witches are living. We shall find each house one by one, and having found it, you will creep inside and leave your little drops of deadly mouse maker in the bread or the cornflakes or the rice pudding or whatever food you see lying about. It will be a triumph, my darling, a colossal, unbeatable triumph. We shall do it entirely by ourselves, just you and me. That will be our work for the rest of our lives. My grandmother picked me off the table and kissed me on the nose. Oh, my goodness me, we're going to be busy these next few weeks and months and years, she cried. I think we are, I said. But what fun and excitement it's going to be. You can say that again, my grandmother cried, giving me another kiss. I can't wait to get started. The end. Oh,
or the end of the beginning in many ways. The job is just beginning to start for the boy and the grandmother, the Van Helsing of the Roald Dahl universe, off to slay the witches, sort of the Dracula of Roald Dahl's universe. And that's it. We've made it. We've made it through the witches, Fox fans. You saw it here first on the Foxy Book Club. I really, really hope you enjoyed it. I'm shattered. I'm tired. I'm not gonna lie. My back is aching. I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. I'm tired. But I genuinely, really, really enjoyed it. Even with the power cut and the disconnection and it being longer than I expected. It was Foxy Book Club. No, but it's been really, really nice. It's been really nice to have you. Yeah, gotta put the effort in sometimes. You know, we'd only had a 2.5 hour Lord of the Rings chapter last time, so I've been slacking. So we needed to put the work in, and there we have it. And I saw the Metal Farmer popping in, and Madeline Fee. Very, very nice to see you both, and Wei Chen as well. And have you only just arrived, Wei Chen, as well? Yeah, 3 of you. Fox fan veterans coming in late there. But yeah, you can rewatch, and like I've said, I will be finishing off my edited complete video of The Witches as well. Oh, we do just have a few pictures as well before I go. I'm definitely going to go and have a lie down. I need to make some food though, and it's 11:15. But you know, sometimes there's more important things than food. Here is the grandmother's house in Norway. Now equipped with new inventions. We've got a door opener, we've got a light switch, and a giant ladder. All fit, kitted out for optimum mouse mobility and convenience. That's what we like to see. Good work. And we've also got the toothbrush, so he can brush his teeth in the little egg cup basin. Very sweet, even though he feels like he doesn't need to. But and he's also bathing now as well, which is interesting because the grandmother said that children should never bath. It's a waste of time and it's dangerous. It's dangerous when witches can come after you. And they are in a witch-infested country, but I'm supposing that mouse people don't smell the same as like thorough, regular children. So perhaps it's safe to do this. And here we are, very much as we started. But rather than the boy sat with the grandmother, we have the mouse sat with the grandmother and the cigar. It's almost identical to the picture right at the beginning. And I was trying to recapture the mood of the first chapters before all the excitement starts again. But I was just calming things down a little bit. I think I'm not sure if I've already done a Foxy Book Club ringtone or not. Like on the Google Drive, there are 3 like little ringtones that people were asking me to sort of put together at the time. I'm thinking it wasn't Madeline Fee no, who was it? Maybe it was Madeline Fee. I can't remember that. Who'd asked me to do a couple of those. But then maybe there isn't a Foxy Book Club one actually. There might not be. And then this was very sweet, I thought. Lovely words from the boy there. It doesn't matter who you are or what you look like, so long as somebody loves you. It was very sweet. And he's in bed there, cozy, with grandmother who takes such good care of him. And then it's quite a sweet picture. This is all the grandmother wiping her mouth whilst the discussing the plan. And she's been busy. She's kept her cards close to her chest as well. But the boy does see a flaw. Quickly solves it, and there is the jump for joy. As he realises what they can do. It's such a cute little picture. I don't know how you can make... I mean, mice are cute, in my opinion, already, but that is just so adorable. Oh, some people heading off. Oh, yeah. Get yourself back to chapter 4 of The Two Towers. It was an absolute pleasure, that. That was such a fantastic chapter. I really hope you're enjoying it with... I mean, yeah, I won't spoil it, just in case there's anybody who's not got to chapter 4 yet that's wanting to listen. But go and listen to that chapter. It's so good. And is there one more picture? Yeah, one more picture. Yeah, it's been really nice to have you all here. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hope you've enjoyed this story. We had that 3-month gap. I can't believe how quickly those months passed. I've been pretty busy in my personal life, so it's gone faster than... Well, it felt much faster than it actually was. 3 months, gosh. But yeah, I liked how she was just like, it's only Ming, and heck to the vases. She's on a mission here. And then this is the final shot. Kissing him on the nose. About to start on their mission. Lovely stuff. And hopefully they've got about 9 years to do it in. And what will the world look like without any witches in it? I hope they manage. And here are the back illustrations as well. Very nice. With some colour added as well. And look at this. Yeah, the blue spit doesn't really come into it again after the beginning, but lovely description of the witches and how to identify them and everything. And I like how the Grand High Witch is saying this here as well.
Find out more about Roald Dahl by visiting the website at www.roalddahl.com.
For Lucy. Lovely stuff. Well done, Roald Dahl. One of his many, many wonderful, wonderful stories for children and adults alike. Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff. Really nice to hear those thoughts. Glad you've been hammering chapter 4 as well, Michelle. Lovely stuff. Thank you, Gabby. Yeah, that's lovely, that, Juz. I'll really try and do a calmer reading at some point with some pictures as well. I'm just not sure what it could be, because I've got this illustrated Alice in Wonderland, but that's very zany. And then I've got Pride and Prejudice, but I do like to get into the characters and everything with Pride and Prejudice. Like, and then I do have an illustrated children's nursery rhyme book, but it's almost too childish, I think. I've been hesitant whether to read that. I think it's a little bit too light. But yeah, like a calmer picture story that's not too childish would be really nice, I think. Oh wow, a deep man's voice for Eowyn. Yeah, I mean, it's very tricky, you know, if you do have a deep voice. some people don't like it when a man lightens their voice to play a woman. Some people think it's really necessary, but it's tricky, of course. But yeah, that is the plan, Alex. That is the plan. So we'll see how it goes. Eowyn is appearing pretty soon, so yeah, that's the plan. Yeah, it was a nice scene, Mama Fox. I was really enjoying the Mr. Jenkins stuff, and yeah, it was a shame to get that broken up, but you know, we made it work, didn't we? We made it work. I will do. Thanks, Olivia. Thanks, everybody. Shannon and T-Class. I don't know if you've gone now already. Thank you, Laura. And Lightweaver and anybody else who's still hanging out right to the end. And thank you for, you know, reconnecting and everything when I'd got disconnected. And sticking with me. It's been very nice indeed. Alright, book clubbers, Fox fans, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope it's been good fun for a few hours of your day today, and you can obviously rewatch anything that you've missed. At first, it will only save the first couple of hours, as always, but once YouTube has processed it, you'll be able to watch back the whole thing. Alright, everybody. Likewise, Sasha. High fives all round. Good night, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Take care. There will be more Lord of the Rings coming soon. The Complete Witches coming soon, and let's see what else I get to you over the next couple of weeks. And I will definitely be looking to have some more live streams soon as well. I won't just schedule something right here, right now, but look out for the notification. You can always follow me on Discord. I always give the first heads up there. If there's going to be a heads up, it's going to be on Discord. So the link is in the video description if you want to follow me on Discord and get the news. Thank you, Sherry. Good night, Michelle. And good night to Wei Chen. Yeah. Victoria. And all the rest of you. Juz. It's been lovely to have you here. Take care, everybody. Yeah, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Read to you soon.